You're listening to the Deep End Podcast, a ministry of Hermitage Church, where we have a conversation about Sunday's sermon and chat about ways we can go a little deeper in our faith. I'm Hunter Steinmetz, and I'm one of the pastors here at our church. Every week, we will listen in on a conversation with the preacher from this week about deeper theological pieces of the sermon and suggested practices on how we can embody this word and allow it to seep into our skin. We hope that this podcast will become a part of your weekly faith journey on your drive into work, as you do the dishes, or as you sip your coffee on Tuesday mornings. Thanks for jumping into the deep end with us. Let's listen in on this week's conversation. Welcome to the Deep End. I'm Hunter.
And I'm Brad.
Today's episode is really going to focus around this idea of daily bread, of manna in the Old Testament. So we're going to start in Exodus with the manna in the wilderness, but then trace that theme through the Old Testament.
And it's more than just about food, right? It's about trust, dependence, and sort of the spiritual rhythm that shapes our lives.
Yeah, it's kind of the wilderness with Israel after the Red Sea, after the whole, Pharaoh, 10 plagues debacle. So in Exodus 16, the Israelites are in the desert and they start complaining. They're hungry, and they basically are like complaining to Moses and Aaron, but really to God. And they say, like, it would have been better that God would have just killed us in Egypt. At least our stomachs were full.
Yeah, it reminds me of goldfish. Like goldfish have short memory.
Yeah, kind of.
I don't know why that image came to my mind of just like a fish, a goldfish. Sorry.
Goldfish is like manna.
That's true. But God had just rescued them, and now they're ready to give up because their stomachs are empty.
And then God responds, interestingly, not with anger. He's not like, why are you complaining? Why are you doing all these things? But instead, he solves the problem for them, and he gives them manna, which, and this is an interesting thing that I think if nobody else finds it interesting, Brad and I both will. The Hebrew actually says manhu, which is what it is.
What is it?
If you just read it, it's like, what is that? But then when it gets translated into Greek, the Greek word is manna. So we always call it manna, even though it's not actually what the Hebrew says. But manna does not mean bread. Manna is, what is that?
Yeah.
But they're referring to the bread that God gives to them.
Yeah, it reminds me of a kid just looking down and see something new, like learning the language and world around them, and the kid's like, what is this in front of me?
Like what? Yeah, it's like, are they like, wow, what is this? What a gift. Or like, you expect me to eat that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure which one it comes from. Either way, they're like, what?
Yeah.
But it's the way that God provides.
Yeah, and there's a twist sort of with it, right?
Yeah, and the manna comes with like instructions. They are only to gather what they need for the day. You cannot store it up, because if you do, and God says this in the beginning, it's not like they find out. He says, if you take more than you need, it will spoil. Worms will grow out of it. You won't be able to eat it.
Yeah, except for one day of the week. Then they collect enough for 2 days.
Because it was very important that they rest. It's not just about hunger. It's about dependence on a God who actually cares about you. And God is training them to trust him daily.
Yeah, it seems like it's this slow process of trying to reshape their mindset from an Egypt way of life, where this stockpiling and control meant survival.
Yeah, because, I mean, for their entire lives, they have belonged to an empire, the Egyptian empire, where Pharaoh is sucking the life out of the people. He takes all of their resources. He makes them work harder and longer for not for themselves, but for his own gain. And so now when they're going into a new place, they have to trust that the God who actually called them is actually going to take care of them. And so even with the Sabbath thing, right? Like, it's not like, hey, we don't work on the Sabbath. You don't pick up bread on the Sabbath. God takes rest so seriously because they never had it. And so God is trying to retrain the way that these now freed slaves think, hey, Pharaoh is not your God anymore. You don't have to do this. So rest is that important, and you can trust that it will be there tomorrow. So lots of what God is doing in the Ten Commandments and everything that they do through the wilderness and then into the Promised Land is training them that they don't belong to Pharaoh anymore. They're a free people.
Yeah. So
let's move to just kind of how like daily bread shows up in different way, like in a couple different scenes in the Old Testament. So we'll fast forward to 1 Kings 17, where Elijah the prophet is in the midst of a drought, and God sends him to a widow in Zarephath.
Yeah, she's down to her last handful of flour and a little oil, and she says, "I'm gathering sticks to make a final meal for me and my son. Then we die."
It's such a messed up story. She's like, well, this is all we have left, so I don't think I'll have enough for you, Elijah.
Yeah.
But this will be the last piece of bread me and my son eat.
Yeah.
And then that's it. So it was nice knowing you. But Elijah says, I mean, the audacity of this, right? Actually, I know that's your last piece of bread. Why don't you give me some of that? Make me bread first. And then he tells her that her jar of flour and jug of oil will not run dry.
Yeah. It's that repeat, right, that we've kind of thought through. Daily provision, not abundance, not storehouses, not excess, but just enough for this unique, it's a widow, which is unique in the context of the Old Testament story. And then this infant, it's her infant son, a woman in the Old Testament, and then her son who is dependent upon, which is just...
And if this widow dies, he's now an orphan. So this... It's interesting, the daily provision and abundance, like Elijah does not say, make me some bread and I will give you all of the flour in the land. I'll give you all of the oil that you could possibly fathom. He's simply, like he says, the ones that you have will not empty. It will always be there. So again, it's tied to trust. She gives what little she has in obedience and God sustains her.
Yeah, and this is the pattern we see. Daily bread isn't just physical, it's relational. It's an invitation into dependence. I think first on God and then dependence on one another that we're in community with.
Yeah, and then in Deuteronomy 8, Moses reflects on the manna, the bread from heaven. He says, God humbled them, fed them with manna to teach you that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And you may not have known that that actually came from Deuteronomy 8 because
Jesus quotes it in the New Testament during his temptation in the wilderness when he's out in a similar situation.
Yeah,
the people are journeying through the wilderness. They're hungry. They're grumbling. Jesus is also kind of re-narrating this story and is doing the exact same thing in the wilderness and is tempted, but is very faithful.
Yeah, and if you are faithful podcast listeners, then you would remember from a couple months ago when we talked about this, that Matthew is actually like drawing upon this Old Testament language and reshaping how Jesus' ministry is also Israel's ministry. And all the ways that Israel fails, Jesus succeeds. And so he pushes back on that temptation, whereas Israel's like, we're hungry.
Yeah,
we wish you would have killed us when our stomachs are full. So Moses is saying that the whole wilderness season is about reformation, and God is teaching them how to live, not just survive. That they no longer belong to Pharaoh. They are under a new king who actually gives his life for them.
Yeah, daily bread was a kind of liturgy, a spiritual rhythm that shaped and formed their lives.
Yeah, and God is shaping their hearts to trust his presence and provision day by day. What do you think, like, to have to trust God every single day that tomorrow there will be bread? Like, what is God trying to do with the people? You know, like, why doesn't God just be like, you can, here, just take all of it. I'll see, just tell me again when you run out. Like, what is that doing that he's trying to, like, train the people to trust him every day? Because it kind of seems like, no, we don't ask for that much. We only get one cookie today. And it's not like a slap on the wrist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's trying to teach them a new relationship.
Yeah, I think it's first just trust on God, trust on the one who is guiding their lives. But I've been thinking about this a ton recently, as this reality that we are storied people. Like, humanity is a people who live amongst different stories. And I mean, you talked about this a little bit with Egypt and this story of Pharaoh, where it's compile everything, store up everything, take up everything. And that forms a certain type of people to literally be a certain type of way internally. So it's interesting to think of the context, even even just that context. They're being formed to see the world as we just need to store up everything because we're going to run out. And it takes this reformation. And in the
every day.
Yeah, every single day. And that reformation isn't, it's practical, like real items, bread, manna, like just trusting that God will provide for that day. It's these real things. It's this real way. And it is the people finding their true life again, but living in the Egypt economy. They're actually losing their souls through the slow process of not even realizing the water that they're swimming in until God says, step outside of the water and see that there's something outside of this.
Yeah, that's good. There's also, in other ways that it shows up in the Old Testament, there's also Psalm 78 and Psalm 105, where the psalmist reflects on the manna, the bread from heaven, calling it the bread of angels.
And Isaiah 55 has echoes of this too. Come, everyone who thirsts, why do you spend money on what is not bread?
And the prophets often tie physical hunger to spiritual hunger. They're asking, what are you feeding your soul with?
So even when Israel had physical bread, they were often spiritually starving. The daily bread becomes symbolic of what only God can satisfy.
So, when we think about the context of daily bread and what the church is doing, that we're planting a church, like what does this mean for us in the context of us planting a church, but also just in the context of us belonging to God? It's not something that we do every day. We're not actually getting out of our tents and going and running our hands through the dew and getting some what is that for breakfast.
Yeah. We're people who are even still wired and have been formed to crave security and certainty. We want to store up. We want to control.
Yeah, and even when we every single week when we pray the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught the disciples to pray and us to pray that give us this day our daily bread.
Yeah,
and he's looking back towards the manna, and it's not weekly, it's not monthly, it's daily bread.
Yeah, and maybe this invitation is to come back to that daily rhythm, to that way of breathing, that way of swimming in this way of life, whether it's in prayer, whether it's in scripture, or whether it's just showing up to trust God today.
Yeah, daily bread is not just about provision, it's also about the presence of God. God is with us in the everyday, in the ordinary, and in the enoughness of today.
Yeah, so whether you're in a wilderness season or feeling like you're running on fumes, maybe the call is to trust in the daily bread.
Just enough for today. Not tomorrow, not next week, just today. And tomorrow's will be enough too.
And that's where I think the freedom lies and where we find our lives again.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us on The Deep End. I'm actually preaching on Sunday, and we'll be talking about the parable of the vineyard workers. So there's some daily bread tie-in there. So I'm glad that you've listened so that you can prepare your heart well for that. But always feel free to reach out with your thoughts or questions, and however this podcast can be most helpful for those who are listening. We would love to hear your feedback.
Yeah. Thank you.